Hello and welcome to Masterclasses Online. In this video, which is a part of the series Secrets of the Trade, I will speak with you about colors and show you how to use pigments and dyes. First of all, and before I show you how to prepare, mix and use colorants, let me explain to you a little more about the main differences between the two types of colorants. The first type of colorant is a liquid colorant. Sometimes you can find it in a semi-liquid paste, but most of the time it will be in a liquid form. So these types of colorant are called dyes or stainers, and you can find them generally in bottles or in tubs. The good thing is that they are ready to use. The other type of colorant, this time is not a liquid but a solid. And these types of colorants are called pigments. You can use them as they are, or you can make them becoming more like a paste or more liquid. To make it simple without going deep down into their chemistry, dyes are made of very fine colored particles which come from different sources. It can be animal, vegetal, organic or not, even if nowadays most of them are synthetic. The main characteristic of a dye is that it is soluble. So if I take this dye and if I pour a few drops into this glass of water, you will see what happens. And now I will simply turn it and you will see that slowly it is dissolving into the water. And it is so fine that it doesn't leave any residue, so I had a little drop. So it acts really like an ink, if you prefer, and will stain the water. So how does it work? Well, as you can see, it dissolved completely in the water and combine with it to give its color. So it will do that for any liquid. If it was a solid, then it's a little different. It will be absorbed by the solid to give, by reflection of the light, its color. I will show you that when we will mix a compound. Let's speak about pigments. So pigments are made of larger aggregates than the ones in the dyes and generally comes from mineral sources like oxides or earth particles. The main difference between pigments and dyes is that pigments are not soluble. And that makes a big difference because it means that the pigments will be the colored part of your product that you want to use. To make it more simple, it means that you should always consider the pigments as colored aggregates only. To make it more understandable, I will do as previously. I will take this glass of water, add some pigments, and as you can see, everything is sinking straight to the bottom, leaving the water almost clear. Why? Because they are aggregates and they are not soluble. If I move it like I did with the dye, you can see that it is not really staining anything. And for that I will really have to mix it to give a color to the water. But you will see what will happen afterwards. It will separate again. After a while you can obviously see the difference. So here the dye which is soluble stained the water, which remains perfectly blue, and on this side the pigments which are not soluble separated from the water. They are at the bottom of this glass now, leaving the water cleared again. We are now ready to use our dyes first for some mixes with two different products, a dry one and a wet one. The dry one is actually a hydraulic lime-based mortar in a powder form. Hydraulic means that it will set with water. And the second product, the wet one, is a marmorino fine, which is a Venetian polish plaster made of a non-hydraulic lime-based putty. Non-hydraulic means that it will then set with the air this time. So we have our dose of colorant. But before I start any mix, I would like to point out something very important, especially if you have to make custom colors or if you want to match different colors, different pots, and to be very precise. You have two ways to make accurate measurements, or by weight or by volume. If you do that by weight, you will need to have a scale at least precise at the gram for large amounts or middle range amounts of material. For smaller amounts of material, I will highly recommend you to have a high precision scale this time. You have different models like this one, larger, but this scale is precise at the hundreds of a gram, which then start to be very accurate. And it is what you need, because sometimes the liquid colorants and dyes can be highly concentrated, and you will be very surprised to see what difference 1 gram or 2 can make between 2 doses of colorant. So if you want to be really precise and accurate, have a high precision scale. If you prefer to measure by volume, it's simply to use a measuring jug and refer to your graduation there. It works well for large amounts of materials, or if you use it with water, as we will with the powder here, and you will see that it works then very well, it's very precise. But for smaller amounts of colorants or materials, it will then not be as accurate as a high precision scale, because the graduation can vary sometimes and can just be little over. Anyway, when we are speaking of grams, then it can be a little less precise than a high precision scale. So for large amount it is alright. If not, use a high precision scale when you want to be very accurate. I will add now the dye first into the compound in a paste form. It is really easy, nothing to do apart adding the liquid colorant and mix it. Just something to remember though, make sure that all the colorant has been transferred into your compound, and that is especially true if you have to mix different pots or different batches to keep a consistent, exact same color. So just to add the liquid colorant. Okay. Make sure that you take everything out of it. You can even add just little water to make sure that you take really most of the colorant. Not much water, just a little. Just to make sure. You don't want to change the aspect of the mix, but just a little water. Now we are good. The thing is to stir it first. Okay. we really want to make sure that we are scraping any white part from the side of the recipient. Okay, we're good now to use the mixer. Okay, so we have our mix done, and I will just see if everything is nice and even. Okay, we have a very good and even color. All good. It was very easy, as you could see, to mix everything, so nothing difficult at all. The only thing that you have to think about is that if you want to create a very intense or very dark color, you will then need to use much more liquid colorants. So that will affect the consistency of your compound. From a paste, it will then turn much more liquid, and that will be a problem in terms of workability. But there is not so much you can do about it. On the other side, using a liquid colorant with a non-hydraulic paste, which dries only in contact with the air, allows you to prepare all your colors and your pots in advance, as far you protect them from the air with a little amount of water on top of your mix, or a sheet of plastic, or simply a good lid. Instead of adding the dye directly into the powder, I will this time add it into the water which is needed to do the mix. So we have 2 jugs here. I will pour a little quantity in this jug, and I will directly pour my dye into this amount of water. All right. I will make sure that here I put most of the colorant. I can even rinse it. That is really to make sure that I have almost no colorant left. It's not so easy with some small pots like that, but the principle is really to use all the colorant. And from this moment, I can add more water. I'll stir it. So, one thing as well which is important, if you need a certain amount of water and you know that it has to be precise, then you have to go really and include, in fact, your colorant, your liquid colorant, into this amount. So you start like that, and then after you add some water up to your graduation, and you can pour everything in one go, you have the right quantity of stain water to give a color to your hydraulic compound. So here we will put everything. And we will make sure that it goes everywhere. Okay. Okay. We make sure that we don't have any bits on the side of the recipient, and we will start to do the mixing. And increase the speed. Okay. Up the side as usual. Everything seems to be perfect. We are good. So I will just try it on this board. Okay, we have a nice mix. Everything is okay. To summarize, when you are using dyes with something in a paste form, you have the big advantage of being able to prepare all your colorations and store your pots. It is something, unfortunately, that you cannot do with something hydraulic in a powder form, and you will have to work as you go. Concerning the coloration, and if you want to do some custom colors, there is absolutely no problem to mix different dyes together to obtain the colors that you want to have. If you are working with something in a paste, non-hydraulic, you can prepare your doses separately, mix them all together, keep some accurate measurements, of course. And if you work with an hydraulic compound, same, you have to do some tries before, but when you have your proportions, put them all together in the same container of water, you stir everything and you will have your color that you can pour into your powder. As for the dyes, I will use the pigments to color the two same products, the lime-based mortar in a powder form, hydraulic, and the lime-based putty in a paste form, which is non-hydraulic. But before that, I would like to speak a little more about pigments in general. You have three different families of pigments: the mineral ones, the organic ones, and the metallic ones. The mineral one will also be divided in three different types: the colored earths, the oxides, and the synthetic ones. Both the colored earths and the oxides can be found in nature. They will give you a consistent and opaque color. They are UV resistant and alkali resistant, which means that they are lime and cement friendly and that you can use them outside. The synthetic pigments are a little bit different because they are not natural ones, but a lot of progress has been made, and they will behave rather well in the same conditions that I mentioned just before, against UV and in lime or cement. But the interesting point with synthetic pigments is that you will have a wider range of colors and more intense, modern, deeper, richer colors than the one coming from colored earths or oxides. Organic pigments are less resistant actually than mineral ones, which means that they are not as UV and alkali resistant. The color will fade out pretty quickly outside. So it's more to do internal work with organic pigments. However, the interesting point is that organic color gives you a more transparent color, which can make the ideal pigments to work for glazing or to give a tint to a varnish, for example. And finally, the last family, the metallic pigments. Well, it is simply some metal reduced in powder. But that is the way you should see pigments. A substance or a material reduced in a powder which has its own color. And this powder, added to a mix with another material or compound, will become a part of this new material. And it will then give it its color. the best way to mix pigments with anything in a powder form is always to do a dry mix, which means that you will add your pigments into your powder, mix, stir everything, and only then add your water or any other liquid. It could be a resin, acrylic, etc. It doesn't matter, but always do a dry mix. So we will start. I add the pigments. And now I stir everything. I would like to speak now about something very important, which is the maximum quantity of pigments that you can use in your mix. If you put more than a certain value, you will go, in fact, to saturation, meaning that you will not give any more color than you already have. As well, you will take the risk of weakening your compound, which will simply be less sticky, because you are adding a neutral aggregate. So the ratio for the oxides and the synthetic pigments is 10% max of the weight of your cement or lime. Concerning the colored earth, it is max 15% of the weight of your lime or the cement. Now, the very good thing when you want to use pigments in a dry mix is that you can prepare everything, all your colors in advance, and it won't set until you add the water. So you can store your mix and only add your water or any other liquid which sets with your compound. It can be an acrylic resin, for example. So you only add this liquid when you want to use your compound. Okay, let's add some water into the mix, but before I will also add a few drops of black soap into the water, and that will help the pigments to disperse much better in the compound without leaving a few little dry bits and stripes, which is not very nice. So I start with a small quantity. I will add just 1 or 2 little more drops of black soap. Okay. And I will start to mix everything. I prefer to start gradually, so I'm sure to not use too much water and to make it too much liquid. I will take the mechanical drill. It should not be so bad. Just checking if everything seems to be nicely blended. What I will do a try here. I always do a try before just to check if everything is nicely blended, or if you have a few strikes or a few bits, carry on mixing again. Yeah, everything seems to be fine. We have no bits and an even color. All good. Let's do now the coloration with the pigments of the lime-based mortar, the non-hydraulic one, in a paste form. As it is not a powder, you will not be able to add directly your pigments into this mix, because you will just create plenty of lumps. it will not moisturize enough the pigments to avoid to have some dry bits, so it will give you plenty of strikes. So the solution will be to create a paste of your pigments and incorporate this paste into your compound, which is also a paste, so you won't have then any lumps or strikes. The other advantage of making a paste of your colorants is that when you will mix it with your compound, it will not change its consistency. So we have everything to create our paste from pigments. Pigments, of course. In our case, water. I say in our case because you should always use a liquid corresponding to the compound that you want to color. So lime will be water. If it was to color waxes, it will be the solvent of wax, which is turpentine. If you wanted to color an oil-based paint, it will be linseed oil, for example. So in our case, it is water. We will use as well black soap again to disperse nicely our pigments. And we will have, once the paste is done, to filter it or to sieve it, just to remove all the lumps. And you can use this type of very thin, fine grade sieve, but you can also use a paint strainer or even stocking tights. They work very well actually, as far as they are solid and fine. And finally, there is another way to create a paste, which involves some vegetable glycerin, and I will show you how afterwards. So I will start by pouring some water first, only a little amount at the bottom to make sure that I won't have any dry bits of pigments after the mix. I'm adding now a few drops of black soap to help the dispersion. I can now add the pigments. And I can stir everything. Just to have a nice paste. Just want to have something you can feel homogeneous without lumps. I will even take that to make sure that everything is well mixed. Okay. And now I will take a bowl. I move that away. I will take my sieve, place it here, and pour it. And squeeze it. So it is some work, but you will make sure that you will have a nice paste, uniform, even, lump-free. See, we can find sometimes a little aggregate like that, so yeah, it is important to have really something very smooth. Now that we have a lump-free paste of pigments, we can either store it for a certain amount of time. It will, even if it dries with the air, you just wet it again and it will turn back to a paste or liquid. So we can use now direct our compound in paste, and we can add it inside. And And now I can use the mechanical drill. All right, let's make a little test of color now. Seems good. A very good way to make a lump-free paste of pigments is to use vegetable glycerin rather than water and black soap. All good. We have a nice, even, powerful color. To summarize everything, let's go through all the advantages and inconveniences of using dyes or pigments. You will find a very large palette of colors with dyes, and if you're after intense, deep, or vibrant colors, dyes are maybe the best choice for you. The other advantage with dyes is that they are really easy to mix, and that is due to the fact that they are made of very fine particles. So you won't need any special preparation, and it is really straightforward. The main inconvenience with dyes is that they are less resistant than pigments against UV and in an acidic environment. They are less stable and weaker as well, generally, so the color will tend to fade over the time. In any case, always check when you buy a dye that it is suitable for external work or to be mixed with lime or cement. Also, if you are using dyes with an hydraulic compound, you will not be able to prepare your colors in advance and store your pots, but only mix as you work, as you go. The main advantage with pigments is that they are, for most of them, UV and alkali resistant, which means that they are the most adapted for external work or to be used or mixed with cement or lime. If you want a very solid, even and opaque color but with a natural look, pigments are the best choice for you. Also, pigments and pigments only will allow you to prepare everything in advance, your coloration, and store your pots and that whatever compound that you are using in a dry powder form or in a paste. And finally, pigments in general and average are cheaper, sometimes much cheaper than dyes. Mainly the preparation and the attention to give to avoid having lumps and strikes of dry pigments in your mix, which will show up during the application process. Also, when you have to do a paste of pigments, some pigments being very difficult to disperse, especially the synthetic ones, it can be then very time-consuming to create a paste of pigments. And finally, when you do a paste of pigments, it It can be very quickly messy with colors everywhere, and that is a pain. You should now have a much better understanding about pigments and dyes. But because it can be all a little bit complicated to remember, and because I could not speak of all the details and all the aspects, the chemistry of colorants, I have attached some PDF files that you can download and where you will find many useful information. A reminder of what pigments and dyes are exactly, the names of the different natural pigments that you can find, the few pigments that you should not mix together to avoid any bad reaction, the different ratios of mixing for not going to saturation, and many other things which I hope will give you the great pleasure and the desire to create your own custom colors. Thank you for watching this video, and I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to know more about pigments in general, I would really recommend you to go on the internet, and you will find many websites with plenty of useful information, especially the ones dedicated to fine arts and decorative paintings. In any case, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me at info@kubidesign.com, and it will be my pleasure to respond to you.